There's this, I read, and I don't remember where, there's the crucifix has Latin letters on the top of it, and it's INRI. It means it's the representation of Jesus Christ, King of the Jews. Hypothetically, that was put on his cross. There's an occult interpretation of that, which is also Latin, which I can't remember, but it means all nature is renewed by fire. And so the crucifixion then is assimilated to the idea of a forest fire. Everything burns down before there's new growth. If you study religion properly, it will demolish your personality. Your personality, like the personality that's you, is like the dead branches on a pine tree. It's like you might be clinging to them because you think, well, I'm all these dead branches. It's like, well, yeah, but first of all, you should let go of them. And second, you should let them burn off. And then you might think, well, I don't want them to burn off because that's me. It's like, yeah, that's true. But it's the false you that you're clinging to. Well, that doesn't mean you want to be burned up in the flames. So to study this material properly is to be burned up in the flames. And there's no escaping that. You're just not in it if that doesn't happen. You don't get it. Like one of the things I realized when I started studying this was that virtually everything I said was a lie. I would say 99%, and by lie I mean it was manipulative, it was unclear, it was vague, and that was all often motivated, or it was a false attempt to gain dominant status, which is typical of someone who's intellectual. It's like, well, I've got these ideas, I've taken them from places, and now I can use them as, say, status weapons, something like that, which is what people do when they're trying to win an argument, say. It's like, that's all lies. It's like, well, that's rough when it's 99% of what you say. First of all, the first thing you realize is how much you aren't. You're not Nietzsche. You have your experience as your claim to reality, and it's often pretty thin. But the development of authentic speech is worth the price that you have to pay for it. So, but you just can't stay detached from this. This isn't a phenomenon to study. It's like the basis of being.
So on that note, because that's an expression of your experience really delving in depth into the material. Whereas there are other researchers looking at this from a different angle. I'm not saying it's more or less valid, it's just different. Right? And they're looking at this from why, not necessarily why or how does religion come about, where do these ideas come from and why are they important, so much as once they're there, why do they perpetuate? And why are they successful? Why do religions exist when there seems to be so much that a rationalist would find objectionable or just silly?
Sure. So, yeah, then that begs the question, who's silly? The rationalist assumes that it's not him. It's like, okay, let's have some evidence. Well, we can fly to the moon. Fair enough. That's one form of evidence. How long has this been working? 200 years. Okay. Let's iterate it for 1,000,000 years and see what happens. Yeah. Right, now, and you can object to that because you can say, well, who knows where the future will lead and so on. But my point is that, well, it's what you assume to be true structures your argument, and you have to assume something to be true because you don't have infinite knowledge. So you make that initial choice. Why? Well, it might be because you're a true truth seeker. Well, I would be careful about making that claim, right? Because you're probably not. So then who are you?
Motivated by something that we're not aware of. Is that
There's no probably about that. Yeah, not only that, you might be motivated by terrible things that you're not aware of. Like truly terrible things. One of the things Jung said about the shadow, which was, for him, that was sort of all those parts of you that weren't very developed and are mad about it because you're like, trying to kill them. And all those sort of storehouse of lies and deception that you've managed and all the things you've left undone and the motivations for doing all that. It's like, that's the shadow. He said, well, the shadow is rooted in hell. And you think, well, that's a nice metaphor. It's like, don't be so sure it's a metaphor. It's not exactly a metaphor. I mean, I can tell. elaborate on that a little bit, if you walk down Bloor Street and you watch, you can see people in hell with no problem. Like, they're not only the people who are completely lost, the homeless, but they're the homeless that you cannot look at. And the reason you can't look at them is because they find your act of mirroring their state of existence intolerable. It will instantly enrage them. And that's because they're in chaos, they're in the underworld, but they're in a particular suburb of the underworld. And that little suburb, that's hell. And you think, well, is it eternal? Depends on what you mean. It's been around a long time. It's been around a long time, and it's really deep. And there's another weird thing about hell, which is if you're in it, no matter how bad it is, there's some stupid thing you can do to make it worse. And that's why it's bottomless.